So, this is my background drawing thumbnail tutorial. So this is going to kind of demonstrate how to draw this kind of stuff down here, which I have opened in PureF, which is a very, very useful window software that keeps images overlaid on your desktop. It's wonderful. So here are some examples of some thumbnails that I did back in college. And they're all in grayscale, and they're all pretty rough. They've got like some scribbles in there, some stuff's not really making sense. But that's okay, because that's like what makes drawing these kinds of backgrounds really fun. I'll be doing two thumbnails, so one will be in Photoshop and then the other will be in Clip Studio Paint. I'm gonna draw probably an exterior and an interior. And the people in the call right now in Fartbox will get to decide what those locations will be. Yeah, I'll just kind of show you the process that I go through. I'll probably start with Photoshop just to get myself warmed up because I'm more comfortable in that software, and I know I'm gonna run into some hiccups when we get into Clip Studio. So, people in Fartbox, say hello. Let's go down the list.
Well, this is Haley, aka Sherbies. I'm here to learn and be educated.
Cool. Samuel.
It's me, Samuel. Sam Goodju, and I'm doing learnings.
Kevin is next, but he's muted, conveniently.
Mm.
He says, "It is I, Kevin."
Hi, I'm Greg, aka Gregzilla. Learning some backgrounds, woo.
Oh. Hi, I'm Dee, also known as Verdi, and I'm also here to do a learn of the background sort.
Hello, I'm Donnie Durdunkleton, and I'm interested in drawing shapes that characters are going to be in.
Yay! So, it's cool you say the word character, because that's kind of what this is all about. I hear a lot of people saying that they only draw characters exclusively, but children, don't forget that there can be character in backgrounds as well. This is what this class is going to teach you today.
No way!
I would like to hear some inspiring locations from each of you. So let's start with some exteriors. What are some places that you find beautiful and that you would like for me to doodle today? This could be something mixed in with nature or a complete cityscape. What's up? What are we talking? Okay. Oh, Kevin says castle and coastline. Ooh.
I was also gonna say castle. Big spooky castle.
Okay. What kind of castles? Let's actually look at Pinterest. This is good. This is good stuff. All right. And like what I really like about this is that these locations all look like it's like heavy building, like architecture, and a lot of nature also being like mishmashed together, and that was always my favorite thing to do, because it's just a good balance of different things colliding, you know? So I will snag a few of these reference images and throw them into PureF. They can be photos or like actual drawings. I feel like just having a good range of things that you find inspiring all together. I like this a lot, but this is more of a 3-point perspective kind of picture, and I'm only going to be doing 2-point. So to get started, I'm going to drop in a grid, and this is one of the most important parts of drawing backgrounds, and it's one of the most intimidating parts as well, because grids are kind of boring. So the way I usually do a grid is I draw what I call a star grid, and this is super easy to create because you just gotta copy paste a bunch of lines. So one vertical line, completely straight, and then I copy that layer and I rotate it holding shift. Oh, By the way, you dudes right now in the shelf or in the fart box, I hope you're drawing along. Please shout if you are.
Trying my best.
Getting started.
Alright. So then you should have a crosshair that's just like this, all on one layer.
Was there a need to make the crosshair from 2 layers, or can you just draw the crosshair on one?
That is a really flippin' good question. So the reason why I copy the first line is so that I can do this. So I can rotate it and the crosshairs meet at a perfect middle point.
Oh.
Yeah. So if you're trying to draw this in like Clip Studio, which I should do right now because I created a guide for this because it works a little differently. People might argue that using Clip Studio is better than using Photoshop because Clip Studio has a perspective tool. And sure, a perspective tool is really cool, but when you're doing thumbnails, that just kills the freedom that you have with drawing really fun, swirly shapes. And I don't believe that being bound to a perspective grid is the way to go. Although, I do know that using the perspective tool later when you're cleaning up your background is probably pretty cool and makes you feel like an epic gamer. So you make a perfectly vertical line. I used the ding dang line tool. Gotcha. Okay, so straight line, like that. And I copy that straight line. I made the shortcut key for duplicating a layer, Control J. And I'm holding Shift and rotating that layer. And then merging them down so that they're on a cool group layer where they can have a family, live happily. And then I'm gonna duplicate that layer again, holding Shift still so that it stays like on a mathematical quarter of this thingy. And then I merge the layers down once more. And then I want a few more divisions. I want it to be at least 16 divisions. So I'm going to do that again. Now with Clip Studio, it doesn't have all the like increments of rotating a thing perfectly. No. So let's just pretend that this is like perfect on 16 even divisions. Like this. And this little boy, this little duty over here is the star grid. And you're gonna need 2 of these for the background that we're gonna draw. Oh, and also, I didn't really mention, but my layers are set up so that I have a lot of space to work in outside of the thumbnail. Oopies, that's not a brush. Over here. And I'm also using a square brush, which is very, very, very important for drawing buildings. Specifically, like you could use any kind of brush you want, but this one I find very helpful for drawing buildings. You don't have a square brush? Okay. So what I do is I use the marquee tool. I hold Shift and make a square. Then I fill that square with 100% opacity alpha situation black. Like that. And then hit Edit, Define Brush Preset, and I'll name the brush Bruce.
Oh.
So now you have a square man. I put the spacing down to at least like 5%. And turn on transfer, which is using pen pressure. Wow, cool. It's for some reason... Oh, there we go. Now it's working. That was
What
a
does
weird-
transfer do?
Oh, it's basically like the opacity dynamics. That's what it used to be called in old versions of Photoshop. But it basically like lets you, you know, shows the different levels of pressure in opacity in your brush. But I'll also give the brush a little bit of shape dynamics. This will be a bit more useful for when you're like drawing over the whole thing and adding details. But when you're just blocking in the silhouette shapes, it's better to just keep that boy completely like uniform in size. And that's pretty much how I make a square brush, fellas. There is a square brush that exists with Clip Studio that my friend Donnie put together. Anyway, I will try and provide a download link for this really great brush. I didn't really explain why the square brush is ideal for drawing thumbnails. The line is perfectly fixed with the vertical and horizontal lines of your square that you've made. And that is really important for when you draw buildings, which tend to just be like this kind of thing. So it's super, super easy to then scribble in this, tone that opacity down, draw on top with a smaller brush, and then have that third dimension kind of invented there for you. That was really bad. We're gonna ignore that one. But that is the reason why I like using a big square brush.
Actually ended up using like the polygon tool method in Photoshop. Like you make the 100 sides.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
That thing is okay. I don't like it because it's too many lines. And I usually just like the clarity and the easiness of just drawing my own. And I know that the one in Photoshop is also like a vector or something and is like complicated. And the really, really important thing that you have to keep in mind when you have your star grid is that you have a really clear horizontal line, because that's your horizon line. And there are some like star grids in the automatic Photoshop thing that come to you like this, which is not good because you don't have a clear line of what your horizon line is. Yeah. You don't need more than this. This is like a lot of lines that I have here, but you don't need more than that. Okay. So I'm gonna keep working in Photoshop because Clip Studio frightens me. Okay, so the next thing to do is to decide where you want the horizon line to be. Generally, if you're looking at like a rule of thirds, you want it to line up anywhere but the middle of your shot. If it ends up in the middle, that's fine. No one will cry except me. But a good spot for your horizon line is to be somewhere around here or somewhere around here in between. Let's put the horizon line over here. And then start thinking about silhouettes. Line up with that for now, and then oh, and I'm drawing on a new layer right now. I should actually just label this HL and then this one sketch.
Are you using a pretty dark color with low opacity right now, or a
Nope.
light color?
I'm using a gray, so something that's
Ooh.
like midway in the grays. I should have said that. Thank you for asking, Donnie.
Anytime.
So, a shape that I'm seeing a lot with castles is that there's some triangle stuff going on. Like, if you look in the pictures here, I don't know if you can see my mouse hovering over, but like, there's generally like a tower that's taller than everybody else, and it's probably where Princess Fiona is and stuff. So that's why I'm lining that up with the rule of thirds. Just to make it clear, like, hey, this is where the princess is. It's the focal point. And then I'm gonna draw a new layer on top. And I'm gonna make my brush color darker. Because I'm gonna be thinking of foreground elements. So we started with a midground. Midground. And then foreground. Then later we're gonna do a background within the background. Or I guess we can call it foreground. But in the foreground, I usually like to put a lot of nature because that stuff is really fun to detail. So I'm gonna think about some rocks kind of pointing in the direction of where the castle kind of is to like guide the eye to the castle, to the focal point. And I'm just drawing some really scribbly kind of things. And now I'm making my brush a little skinnier because I'm gonna suggest some foliage. Heck, you could even add a tree over here and have some vines dangling down. That's something I really like to do. Because it's, it adds some stuff at the top of the scene to kind of suggest that you're like a traveler and you've finally found the castle. And like the vines dangling down is just fun to frame the shot with. This stuff.
So the star grid that we made earlier has not
It hasn't come into
yet?
play yet. I should have probably... I totally freaking forgot it. With your star grid, I want you to duplicate that layer because you're going to need 2 of them. Make one of those layers invisible real quick because all we want is to focus on one. And this one, I'm gonna stretch it out real big and drag it out this way. Now I know that with Clip Studio, in order to stretch the, this isn't the window I want, the star grid properly, you have to do free transform, and the shortcut for that I think was Control-Shift-T. Oops. Control-Shift-T, and then holding Control to click and drag it the way I want you to. So, I dropped in that star grid to be way far to the screen left of the shot, and then I'm going to use my other rule of thirds, or no, not rule of thirds, star grid that I made earlier, and I'm gonna do the same thing but stretch it all the way to the right side. Now, a really important thing to keep in mind when you're plotting out your vanishing points is that they have to be quite far away from each other. They can't just be like an inch away from the frame because it's like a bit too close. I usually keep them about this far away from each other. And then if you want to make the shot a bit interesting, you can add one of the vanishing points inside the shot. Like this. I'm gonna keep them outside because sometimes you run into adding a third vanishing point, which is just too much for my wee brain to handle currently. It's Friday night, I don't need a third vanishing point. No, thank you. So, if you have your star grid in place, you have to make sure that each of your lines are surpassing, like, the frame. Over here, you want it to go outside, like, beyond. instead of just be too small and not give you enough of the information you need. So, like, you don't want it to be like this, for example, because that's too small. You can't get a good estimate of how the lines are supposed to go. Now, I'm going to try and keep my layers organized by putting any of the guideline, like, stuff that's turned to a low opacity. I'm gonna put that in a group and turn down the group as a whole to be less distracting. I'm putting that to like 50%. I suppose we could move to midground again, because there's a lot of information missing between foreground and midground. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to select the same tone that I drew the castle in and make it slightly darker, because I plan to fill out the space between the foreground and the midground by drawing some stuff. And you have to make sure that this is in between, like, you're not drawing on top in the foreground layer, you're just kind of scribbling here. I also just had a wacky idea of, like, what if this castle was fortified in some way? Like, it's over here, and there's, like, a huge chasm between. That could be fun. I like it. I like this composition a lot. I'm into it. And, just now I used the lasso tool to kind of cut into the shape to make it a bit more sharp and scary looking. And I'm gonna just darken this over here to suggest that it's closer to us than the castle is. The castle should be quite far away. And for the heck of it, I'm gonna draw some more foliage down here. And I'm gonna make it kind of like some beat up trees. Some flames kind of destroyed the trees somewhat. There's some really pleasant birds happening in the background of Donnie's world.
I live with a bunch of birds.
Cool. Okay, so I added some more like texture by just making my brush tinier and scribbling in some fun details. And then while I'm here, I may as well kind of cut into the shape of the castle and make it more like a castle, because right now it just looks like a factory. So I'm using the lasso tool a lot with cutting into the shape, just because it feels a little bit more, I don't know, like I can reach into tighter corners this way. And I'll do a little bit of a back and forth between the brush and the lasso. So, I've kind of just cut into the shape a little. I don't need to keep going. I could go forever. You know what I just realized? This castle is just rooftop. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull it up a little. And fill in this area with, like, building. Because it needs substance. There we go. That's better. And I'm going to line you back up with the, or not vanishing point, the focal point. Okay. So, now we can finally head to the foreground. I guess the most important thing that you should have going on in here right now is just that you have a good foreground, midground, and farground situation. Like, keep it to those three. And keep working your way between the three. So, I'm gonna drop in that that Farground, and I'm gonna just do some really generic mountains because it's super easy to do that. Okay, so I'm looking at the mountain range that I just added in, and something that I'm not completely happy with is how much it's leveled with the stuff that I've added in the midground. So what I'm gonna do is just play around and stretch out my mountain like really high up. We're getting some like Castlevania vibes in here, which I was not expecting.
That's what I was hoping for.
That was your plan all along. So a good thing to keep in mind when drawing exteriors is to think of the balance of negative space and positive space. So negative space is basically just another word for emptiness, and emptiness is basically just sky in this circumstance. So I want to keep my ratio most of the time, like if you look at my thumbnails here, I generally like to keep a third of the shot be sky, and then the other 2/3 to be like the scenery and stuff. It's an exception though when you start working on interiors, because interiors have a thing covering your head, so you can't really show the sky with that. I basically just added like a mountain range over here. It's basically just like a cool like sort of concave thing, you know? So what I was about to do was add some atmosphere, and I use the heck out of the gradient tool for this. So I use white, and then I make sure that my gradient is set to circle. Oh, mouse. Okay. So use a linear gradient. Make sure that like it's just an opacity that you're doing and not like a solid, because that is not what I want. And I'm gonna set the opacity to like 50. Start from the ground and then go to the sky and create a little bit of some atmosphere there. You see what that is? It's like adding some distance, between the mountains. And you can even do the other way around, where you select areas that are foreground-ish, like getting closer to you kind of mountains. And do the opposite, where you take a darker tone and do a gradient that's going from top to bottom, and have some little mountains coming towards us. Alright, I'm gonna turn off my horizon line, and I kind of haven't really been paying attention to like the grids or the horizon line or all the rules and the perspective. I'm just looking at this composition as a whole, which is a lot more fun to think about, because the next stage I'm actually going to start thinking of the perspective and stuff. But before I do that, I still want to keep working on how to make this castle more intimidating, so I'm going to make it skinnier. And play with the shape a little bit by pulling things around. Just having fun, you know? Let's add a bridge, just 'cause. Okay. Now, I want to see what this looks like with the frame, like, covering the boundaries. Just so I get, like, an idea of what's happening and figure out ways that I can better balance my scene. Feel like this tree is overpowering my castle, so we're going to scooch it away. So, I've scooched over the tree a little, and I continue to add little details because I can't help it. And I'm gonna play a bit more around with the details of the foreground. Now I'm gonna do the really boring part, which is drawing perspective into the castle and actually looking at castle pictures and stuff. Alright, let's turn on that grid and go on the layer on top of the midground. Put a layer on top, set my brush to black, and make it really little. Make it a tiny child. I'm gonna be paying attention to the grid lines as I sketch on top of the castle. So, there's gonna have stuff going this way. I'll be seeing the underside of this. Drawing that. Oh, this line has to converge this way with these other lines. You know what I'm saying? There's two directions we gotta be looking at, fellas. And as I'm doing this, I'm like not shift clicking around. I'm literally just scribbling and like not really caring if my lines are straight.
So for sketching, so we're like line work is like a part of your thumbnailing process usually.
Yeah, but it's a bit more of a like sketchy line work. So it's one that I don't really think about too much, but it is supposed to kind of define a bit more of what I'm looking at instead of just looking at silhouettes. If you want, you could move on and do another thumbnail if you're really feeling the silhouettes, because doing silhouettes is really fun and you could just do that for forever, and it's like I'm not thinking about perspective. Silhouettes are a lot easier to kind of just bang out and do a lot of at once. But eventually, you know, if you want to flesh out a thing, you gotta draw some sketchy lines.
Okay. That's a part I always struggled with, is knowing when to add lines.
Yeah.
Or if I even should, especially if it's going to be a painting.
So, the unfortunately cool thing about castles is that they are very cylindrical, which is annoying to draw. There's a lot of ellipses, and I'll just kind of give a little quick guide for drawing ellipses in perspective. So the way to think about it is that you got the underside of circles up here meeting with the top side of cylinders up here. I should have said cylinders. And as these two fellas get closer to each other, like, or closer to the horizon line, they get flatter and flatter and flatter and flatter until they become nothing.
That was a cool fucking trick. What was that?
So, the way that I did that, and I'm gonna have to show this in Clip Studio because I know it's different, is you get a crosshair in between what you transform. And it shows up always in the middle, but you can move that bad boy, and that will... I line it up with the horizon line, because that's where everything lines up, you know. And I hold Alt and Shift, and then I'm able to transform that boy to go with the flow. Let's see how to do that trickerino in Clip Studio. I have two. There we go. There we go, everybody. Everything's okay. It's all under control. Okay. So, yeah, you can move the little dude and then line it up. Okay, so Control-Shift-T, Control-Alt, drag this corner, and then you get to do the thing. Alright, so we are back. I will continue to do some details over on this castle here. And, yeah. So I'm probably going to do some little minor changes to the silhouette as I do this. Because, like, one thing that, I am noticing with this castle is that there's a few things that are lining up with each other when I want to make this a really staggered looking building. So I'm gonna actually pull this. I'm gonna pull this up a bit so that it doesn't line up with the same level as all the other things in this building, because I just want to add variety wherever I can. And just continue that little building. Okay. Let's keep drawing, shall we? So I've drawn castles before, so I already know a little bit of, like, how their aesthetic works. But I'll kind of just, like, recount some of the details that I see that I'm going to repeat into my illustration. So everyone knows that castle rooftops have this like stepped looking thing, so I'm gonna add it over here. Oh, that's ugly. Alright, and notice how it's ugly and that I'm not really caring about if it's working in perspective or whatever. I'm just kind of like, hey, it's that shape y'all are familiar with, check it out. Like, you guys know that castles do that thing sometimes. Pretty cool. And let's add some, like, windows that are wedged in to the building. The roof, the triangles. Just a lot of triangles. It's wedging. Well, the scale of this castle is much smaller than the scale of the castle I'm trying to draw. So I'm gonna make the windows smaller. And I'll make the windows different sizes. To keep it, you know, keep some variety. I feel like when I'm doing this, I'm thinking like how, when you're looking at clouds and you're like, oh, that looks like a hamster. Or whatever. I'm kind of just thinking that way with my brain, where it's like, in the silhouettes, what am I kind of seeing that I can, like, form into that space?
What structures you can assume.
Yeah, exactly. Alright, and then when I'm doing, like, architecture, a lot of what, like, I'm just doing is, like, transitional lines. So between a lot of windows and floors, like, of buildings, they'll have like different sort of layers to the cake. Think of it as a cake, and there's like a layer of windows, and then a layer of this sort of like fancy molding, and then a new layer that is gonna be pictures of SpongeBob. Like,
it's all cake, baby.
It's all cake. Let's say that part of this castle is destroyed.
Alright.
Because I'm a bit lazy. And I have other things that I want to show you all today. And because this gate is under the horizon line, that means we'll be seeing the
top.
Yes! I love it. Today is a good day. This part is really fun because I'm just going fast, and the faster you go, the more nature-esque it looks, the more natural.
More organic, perhaps?
Organic. That is the word I was looking for. Also, how did these people get into the castle? Probably through an entrance that I'm going to invent over here. So yeah, when I draw, like, rocks, I'm usually just, like, thinking, again, sort of like the layers thing. And oh my god, the layers analogy is also part of Shrek. Wow, everything is just connecting, and I'm having a moment.
Everything is just cake.
And onions. So now I can start to detail out the foreground stuff, and the reason why I didn't keep the foreground stuff to a full black is just so that I could do these little details here that I'm gonna do, which is just rocks and foliage and whatnot. Alright, let's turn on that HL again, just because I want to get across that we're seeing a bit more of the underside of this cliff. So what I'm going to do real quick is select this and skew it a bit so that it's kind of like that cylinder thing. You know that on average those trees are probably the same size. So
Yep.
if I make this one bigger, oops, I did not want to do that. It'll really sell that, oh, this tree's closer to me because it's bigger. And the trees that are further away are smaller. But you know that, like, if you were in this world, those trees are the same sizes. That's a really cool trick for when you're drawing, like, a city, for example, and there's streetlights in your shot. Just draw streetlights going down a street, and it'll tell you, like, the perspective a little bit better. By the way, I'm drawing all of this, like, sketch stuff on one layer, and you'll see why later. It's just because when you turn it off, it's really satisfying to see, like, oh my god, I have a background. Oh, and as I'm doing this, I am hardly hitting undo because I do not want to spend a bunch of time trying to make my my strokes really perfect. This is all about just, like, natural, sort of what's going in your thought process sort of stuff. Like, even in the final version of when I'm, like, cleaning up a background, I don't hit undo that much, because I like the way that my strokes look when they're just wobbly, and I don't like spending too much time on things. I'm a bit lazy. Like, let's say, like, later I want to change the lighting of this scene, then you can still work off of the silhouettes or just get a completely different atmosphere. Like, if I want to use this line art and then start painting underneath, oops, with some values, and, like, let's say it's nighttime, so now the sky is dark, so the composition will feel completely different if the sky is dark. And, well, the things further away are still gonna do their thing. Or closer, rather, where they're darker in the foreground. Just because that's the way atmosphere sort of works. But you get a completely different stuff, but it's the same work. You did the same amount of work to get to the line art. So now, I guess I can start the thumbnail for the interior an hour or two later. If you guys have the energy for it. Or I can save that for another time. Alright, so the council has spoken. There will have a part 2 for this tutorial, and it will happen at a later date. and it'll be discussing the drawings, the drawings of an interior background thumbnail.
Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have Twitch Prime, use it. It's free. Talk to your parents; they might have one. It's yeah. Go ahead. Twitch Prime, like, subscribe. Thanks.
All right. Thank you everybody for watching. Enjoy drawing backgrounds. Goodbye.